This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. It is February 1776 in the United Kingdom. A man as famous as you can be at that moment without being royal or an aristocrat. His name is James Cook, Captain James Cook. He has returned from 2 voyages that have everyone's fascinated. He's sitting down at a dinner table by one of his most admiring fans, Lord Sandwich, John Montague, at his estate, and attending the dinner, nothing but praise for Captain Cook. The discussion turns on the fact that there will be a 3rd voyage, and Cook has declined to go. Cook is now the captain in charge of the Greenwich Hospital, which is a post that is a reward for his first 2 voyages. I welcome Hampton Sides. The Wide, Wide Sea is his new book, Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook. Captain, congratulations. A very good evening to you. That dinner table, you sat me down at that dinner table and I listened in. What is the discussion? What is Captain Cook hearing, given that he's already chosen not to go for the 3rd voyage? Good evening to you.
Good to be with you, John. Thank you. It's a pleasure. So yes, that dinner proved to be a very historic occasion because Captain James Cook was, man, he'd thrown in the towel. He was retired. He had been on 2 monumental voyages around the world. He was already in the pantheon of the great explorers of all time. England had given him a sinecure, an easy job at the Greenwich Hospital, and he was pretty much ready to be kind of put out to pasture. And he got wind at this dinner of another voyage that was being planned. And he was quite curious about it. And I should back up and explain a little bit about who Lord Sandwich was, the host of this dinner party. So he was one of the most powerful men in all of England. He was the first Lord of the Admiralty and a big believer in Cook's voyages around the world. And he was also famously, and this proves to be true. It sounds apocryphal, but I believe it's true. The inventor of the sandwich. The Lord Sandwich was a very busy man, and he was always on the run. And apparently, he just, stuck a slice of beef between 2 slices of bread, and called that dinner, and that became known as the sandwich. But anyway, at this dinner party where they are not eating sandwiches, they're eating very fine food, Lord Sandwich begins to try to convince Captain Cook to take on this new assignment, like to come out of his brief retirement and take on this huge expedition, which is to sail around the world again, and ultimately to go to present-day Alaska and to try to find a Northwest Passage over the top of Canada or through North America that would connect the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. So this is very tantalizing. Cook is quite restless at this point. He's not enjoying his early retirement. And it's a classic scenario, I think. A lot of great men and women who are near the end of their career contemplate retirement, but they're also thinking, I don't know, I've still got more stuff to do. He ultimately stood up, raised his glass, and signed on for this voyage. He said, I'm just the one to undertake this. And so the 3rd time's the charm, I guess. He's going to go back out now for his 3rd voyage around the world. And I think most of us know that ultimately this voyage does not go well for Captain Cook.
We need a moment about where Cook comes from. He's Royal Navy at this point, but he started as a commercial sailor for the Quakers. And there's much about him that suggests Quaker temperament. Bottom line thinking, very dry, not puritanical, but cautious about his personal habits. He's very well married. He has children, small children, and a 3rd is on the way, I believe, a 2nd or 3rd. His post at the Greenwich Hospital is much admired and is meant to be a reward for his life. So in your studies of his diaries and his logs, you say restless. What do we need to know about his personality? Was he a sympathetic figure? Was he haughty? Was he removed from ordinary commerce? What did
Yeah.
what did the Quaker influence have to do with his genius?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to understand that Captain Cook rose up through the Navy in an unusual way. He came from poverty. He was born in Yorkshire, and his father was a farmer, and he was going to be a farmer himself, probably, but for the fact that he, at a young age, apprenticed to these Quaker shipbuilding interests in a place called Whitby, a seafaring town on the North Sea that was famous for building these ships called Whitby Cats. And the Whitby Cats were ships that were, although they were not sleek, they were not beautiful, they were not fast, but they were solid. And they were meant to transport coal from Newcastle down to London. Um, so Captain Cook apprenticed under these Quakers and imbibed, I think, a lot of their values and temperament, frugality and, an aversion to ostentation, honesty, uh, simplicity of dress, and these sorts of values. And he worked his way up through this merchant marine, went all over the Baltic, went as far as St. Petersburg on these ships, learned to master these vessels, the Whitby Cats. But then he jumped over to the Navy and had to work his way up, all the way up from obscurity, really as an able-bodied seaman, all the way to the fame and fortune that he would enjoy. And what the Navy figured out about Captain Cook is that he was steady, that he was serious, and that he was a genius at making maps. And that is the real skill that I think elevated him to a whole different, order of magnitude. This was someone who made, charts and maps. He was a hydrographer. He was someone who could sail around an island and you make an incredibly accurate map of an island, like it turns out, like New Zealand. When he goes there, he circumnavigates New Zealand, and it's stunningly accurate. Like you can superimpose a satellite image of an island like Newfoundland, another place that he mapped, over his maps of Newfoundland, and they're just chillingly accurate. They're like, how did he do it? And how did he do it with the kinds of tools, crude tools that they had to work with back then? So the Admiralty understood this guy was something special. He knew how to captain a ship. He knew how to do a map. He knew how to lead men. And they rewarded him with these Enlightenment era expeditions around the world.
One more detail, there's a reward of 20,000 pounds if the discovery of the Northwest Passage is certified back in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
It is extremely attractive to the whole crew. So let's meet the crew, especially the officers and the
Yep.
Whit Cat Resolution. The book is The Wide, Wide Sea. Hampton Sides is the author. Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook, coterminous with the American Revolution and a lot of other changes going on in Europe, war that will last for some years between Spain and France and Britain. But at the same time, there's discovery at hand, and Captain James Cook is now given the third voyage with his mission to find the Northwest Passage, somewhere north of what they understand to be Alaska. The maps are very inexact. Some suggestion that the maps are deliberately inexact because the Russians are fearful that the Europeans will show up and grab the best land, the best ports in the Northern Pacific. We're now going to crew the third voyage, thanks to Hampton's research. The Whitby Cat is what he's going to sail, called Resolution. His first officers are important here. Charles Clerk will command the Discovery. Who is Clark at this time? What do we need to know about him, Hampton?
Well, Clark has been sort of Cook's right-hand man for his first two voyages, and it was thought that he was going to be the captain of this one until Cook decided no, he was going to come back out of retirement and be the captain of the voyage. Clark is a seasoned navigator. He's been around the world numerous times. He seems to have luck on his side. In the sense that he's survived many calamities at sea. But unfortunately, just before the voyage set sail, Captain Clark, who had signed on as a guarantor to his brother, who had all these debts, his brother absconded from London, and Captain Clark was thrown in debtor's prison. This was a common practice back then. And if you serve as a guarantor to someone, they leave town, you go to debtor's prison. And so here's this captain in a dungeon, and tragically he contracts tuberculosis, and that becomes a theme in the entire book. Is that the captain of the sister ship, the consort vessel, is dying slowly but surely of TB. So that's one very important figure in this drama. There's
James King, second lieutenant.
Yes,
who is very dear son-like to Cook. He almost adopts him. What are King's skills?
King is a very talented young astronomer. And everywhere they go on these voyages, they set up a little observatory on the island to observe the heavens, the stars, the moon, in order to verify the accuracy of their chronometers, to know exactly where they are in the world. So Cook brings on this young man, James King, a great young astronomer, turns out also a very good writer. And yeah, I would say almost adopts him. He becomes his first lieutenant. And everywhere Cook goes, this young man, half Cook's age, ends up, is there and is observing things. And his journals are incredibly important part of the narrative.
John Gore, the Virginian-born American. What do we need to know about him?
Well, he was kind of a character. He had been on Cook's first and second voyage. Was said to be the very first person. This is a sort of a dubious achievement. The very first person to shoot with a firearm a kangaroo. This was on Cook's first voyage. He's a seasoned captain himself, and I don't think it's a spoiler to the listeners to know that Captain James Cook dies on this voyage in a very dramatic way. Ultimately, John Gore is the man, an American-born man who pilots the two ships home to England. And when they get home to England, this Revolutionary War that's been going on in the colonies is now over. And he has to make a decision, John Gore does. Who am I? Am I an American or am I British? Which side of this conflict should I be on? Because the entire voyage. Go ahead.
No, my favorite officer. I wanted to rush to him because I like him so much. William Bligh. What do we need to know about William Bligh?
Right. Well, William Bligh, of course, goes on to fame and infamy as part of as a captain of the HMS Bounty. But what is it, 8-9 years later? He's an incredibly competent captain, but he has a insufferable personality that ultimately I think contributes to that famous mutiny that happens to him later. But on this voyage, he's a young officer. He's the master of the Resolution, Captain Cook's ship, and he's learning from Captain Cook. I mean, he is like proving to be every bit as competent and as reliable as Captain Cook himself. And I think so many of the skills and so many of the especially map making and chart making of quickly making charts. This is something that he learned directly from the master, Captain Cook. So yeah, Bligh is an important character throughout the voyage, but we see that personality coming through. Like, no one wants to be in his presence longer than 5 minutes. He's one of these guys who's always right, or at least he thinks he's always right, and he usually is. And he just drives people crazy.
He is a lever, however, that Cook learns to use when he needs a good navigator and cartographer.
He's
Besides himself,
very, very good at it.
he
He's
Cook,
really
Cook,
one of the best.
Cook uses his skill. Cook is a very shrewd manager of his officers. One more detail, I think, before we set sail in Resolution and Discovery. The theories about ice by a man named Daines Barrington. How did that inform the preparation and the thinking about seeking the Northwest Passage?
Yeah. Well, there's all kinds of science and pseudoscience that was swirling around the topic of the Northwest Passage. How do you get up there? How do you break through? How much ice is up there? And you have to understand that the Northwest Passage had become truly an obsession of the British Empire. They had, it was obviously something very important in the sense that it would cut off many, many months of dangerous travel down to the tip of South America or the tip of Africa to get around the
We've
world.
got a minute, Hampton. We've got a minute. 1 minute. Go ahead.
And so this was an incredible obsession that so many British sailors had lost their lives and suffered looking for this Northwest Passage. But there's a guy named Daines Barrington who had this notion, hey, listen, seawater, ocean water cannot freeze. This is an absolutely wrong idea, but the idea was if you can get into the open sea and follow a path up and over Canada and not get too close to land, you will have smooth sailing all the way. You won't even need to reinforce your ships for the ice. And this wrong-headed idea really animated and fueled this voyage. And of course, we now know the science is all completely wrong.
The book is The Wide, Wide Sea. Hampton Sides is the author. Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain Cook. We're now at sea, heading south to the Cape of Good Hope. James Cook is in a hurry the whole time. Waste not a moment. Why? He wants to find the Northwest Passage. He wants the reward. He wants to cap an already unbelievable amount of achievement in the whole world. Everybody knows James Cook. He's a household name. He wants to cap it by finding the shortest route between Europe and the wonders of Asia. He wants to be the discovery himself, and he wants to get there quickly. He's headed to the Cape of Good Hope. However, there is very nearly the end of the voyage as they avoid an underwater obstacle just barely. And Hampton, you observe at this point that the crew that had been with James Cook before, either on the first and second or one of the two voyages, note that he's changed. His personality is different. How so?
Yeah, people are starting to notice that Captain Cook is erratic. He's mercurial. He's got a horrible temper that comes out more and more often, very different from the first two voyages. He's starting to use the lash more frequently with his own men. He's moody. He's in his cabin alone much of the time. He's also a little bit reckless. And as they're approaching the Cape Verde Islands, just west of Africa, this is a place that's well-known and well-charted, but they almost run aground on these shoals that would have left a mortal wound in the Resolution, and they would have sunk, and the voyage would have been over. And how Cook allowed this to happen is not very clear, but Cook's men are starting to wonder. This captain, he's tired. He's different. This isn't the same guy that we knew from voyages 1 and 2. And they're wondering, what is it? Is it a parasite? Is it arrogance, recklessness? But perhaps he's starting to believe his own, celebrity, his own press. Or is he having some kind of spiritual or existential crisis, or is it just simply that he's a man in a hurry and in a ship that is itself a bit tired because this Resolution had been around the world on Cook's second voyage? But his men are starting to wonder and worry about their captain.
On board is a special guest. His name is Mai. They call him Mai. Who is he? What is his significance? Why are they taking him along?
Yes, Mai's a major character in the book. He was the first Polynesian to set foot in England, as he came to England as part of Cook's second voyage. And he had spent 2 years in England, had become a celebrity. People loved this young Polynesian man. They rolled out the red carpet for him. They gave him, you know, fine clothes to wear. He went to the estates. He learned to hunt and play backgammon and chess. He was paraded around the Royal Society as the perfect example of the quote unquote noble savage. He met Samuel Johnson and Boswell and all the scientists of the day. Um, but after 2 years of doing all of this, Captain Cook understood that Mai was homesick. He wanted to go back to Tahiti. He wanted to go back to his home islands. And King George said to this young Polynesian, "We will get you home. England will get you home with all of your belongings that you've now accumulated, and Captain Cook will be the man to take you home." So Mai is on board the ship. He has learned English. He is every bit a part of the crew. He's important, kind of almost like an adopted son of Captain Cook, and is a major character running through the voyage.
The voyage is going as fast as possible, the Cape of Good Hope. They do make stops. There's Desolation Island, where there are no trees, there's nothing. But Cook is a magnificent navigator and also something of a lucky navigator. You mentioned Hampton several times, that he finds islands and landscapes that nobody knows there. He just happens across them. It's almost as if he's magical.
Yeah, it's like he has some sort of magnetic attraction to land and places where they're not supposed to be something. And he had spent much of his career actually looking for major land masses, including this supercontinent that was supposedly existed in the southern hemisphere. He didn't find, he didn't find the supercontinent, and he became famous for that, smashing this theory that there had to be this massive, massive continent, bigger than all of Asia. So this is a man who has incredible luck at either finding land that no one knew existed or not finding land that the scientists all presumed was there. They sometimes call him the negative discoverer. But yes, I don't know what it is. He has this incredible knack, and it's something that all of historians and biographers have talked about.
We will approach Tasmania. This is south of New Holland, although it's not clear at this moment whether it's attached or not. And
Right.
here we introduce Cook, the amateur anthropologist. Who are the Palawa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they make landfall in at a place that we now call Bruny Island. It's a little island off of Tasmania. Of course, Tasmania was not called Tasmania at that time. It was actually known as Van Diemen's Land, but no Europeans had set foot in this place. Captain Cook arrives and very quickly makes contact with the Palawa people. These are the Aboriginal people of Tasmania. And this is one of those rare, wonderful experiences of first contact where everything goes well. Cook's men are curious about these people, and these people are curious about Cook's men. They trade, they barter. There are no sexual relations that lead to, the transmission of venereal disease or anything like that. Everything is peaceful. There's no violence. Cook stays a short time. He does not overstay his welcome. He replenishes his ships and is on his way within about a week. But what's remarkable is that, yes, we see Captain Cook in the role of an anthropologist or an ethnographer, even though he has no training in that. He's just this, farmer's son from Yorkshire who has a natural curiosity, a kind of agnosticism about other cultures. And he writes down in his journal very clearly what these people wear, how they converse, how their rituals go, how they're what they eat, how they hunt, what their implements are. And it's extraordinary. And this is one of the great things about Cook, is that he's not trying to convert people to Christianity. He's not trying to tell you how bad your civilization is and how good ours is. He's this creature of the Enlightenment who is curious about these people and interested in documenting and ultimately publishing this information to the world.
Does he believe they've been cut off for thousands of years? Does he speculate about that?
He really doesn't know. He believes this is actually part of Australia.
I see.
And he doesn't know about the strait that separates Tasmania from Australia. And it's really important throughout this voyage to understand, people didn't know what the world looked like in very fundamental ways. And that's what's amazing about Cook. And you have to go back to those times and peel back the layers of what we now know now, to understand this is not just first contact with peoples, but first contact with continents and the shape of things and the basic makeup of the planet. And Cook is so important in sorting a lot of those big mysteries out, what the world looks like.
The tragedy is that Palawa are extinct. What happened to them, James?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Even though Captain Cook's voyage did them no harm, and it was a good contact, within 1 century, the Palawa were virtually extinct. There was one woman left, a lady, elderly woman named Truganini, and she was photographed. The British came. They hunted the Palawa for sport. Many of the Palawa died of diseases, pathogens, European diseases. Um, and this is why I think Captain Cook is so controversial around the world in some sense. It's not what he did, but it's what came immediately after his voyages that accelerated this process of a fatal impact on these very fragile island societies. So it's really tragic. The Palawa perhaps exist in mixed blood situations, but this Truganini was believed to be the last full-blooded Palawa alive. So it's a real tragedy.
On to New Zealand, the Maori. Now, Cook knows about the Maori and they land, but he has a mission in mind that he's not shared with his officers, and they're frustrated. They want to get to Tahiti. Tahiti is paradise. Let's go. No, he stops in New Zealand, and he's investigating a crime or a tragedy. What happened?
Absolutely. So on Captain Cook's second voyage, something had happened to Captain Cook's consort ship, which was known as the Adventure, and in which 10 of the men on the Adventure, the ship had become separated from Captain Cook and was in New Zealand. And 10 of these men had gone out on a little expedition to cut grass, and they had gotten into a conflict with the Maori, and the Maori had killed them all, and then had proceeded to eat them, as was the custom of the Maori warriors of that day. And Captain Cook was not there for all of this. And so now, flash forward 4 years later, Captain Cook wants to go back to the scene of the crime. He wants to investigate this murder, this mass murder or violent conflict that led to cannibalism. Cook's men were just shocked by this episode. But Captain Cook was much more, he was like a detective, a homicide detective. He was calm about it. He was not shocked by the cannibalism part of the story at all. He just wanted to investigate what happened, who was at fault, and he ultimately concludes that his own men had brought on this tragedy by rashly using their weapons first. But it's basically he's going around and interviewing people like Columbo or some kind of, detective. it's a different role that Captain Cook had never played before. And he ultimately concludes that his men were at fault, and he declines to punish the Maori in any way.
And the Maori are ferocious warriors, and they have a war dance that is scary even when you watch it on YouTube. What does does he believe that he's threatened by them?
Not really. He now this is I think the fourth or fifth time that he's been to this part of New Zealand. You know, he had grown to love this place and had good relations with the Maori himself. Um, and he knew they were fierce warriors, and he knew about this fact that in combat, the Maori would consume the flesh of their enemies. Um, he wasn't shocked by any of that kind of stuff. You know, and back in England, it was considered the ultimate taboo. You cannot obviously participate in cannibalism, but Cook was not shocked by it. But he yeah, had grown to love the Maori and their culture, and had begun to see in the short time that he's been voyaging in the Pacific, major changes in their society as a result of his contact with them. He's starting to see this isn't good for the Maori. They've changed. They're restless. Their economy is changing. They have new diseases that they didn't have before. He writes quite eloquently about his fears and doubts about these voyages and what it's done to the Maori.
The book is The Wide, Wide Sea. Hampton Sides is the author. Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook. Wondrous new book. I recommend to everyone who's restless. 250 years ago, this is the time to read the book. As 250 years ago, traveling the world was extremely perilous. In this instance, however, Cook is bearing for Tahiti, a well-known place called Aphrodite's Island. This is now August of 1777. They've been at sea for more than a year. They call the island they land on King George III Island. What are they expecting? Why are they excited, Hampton?
Everybody by this point had heard about how lovely Tahiti is. Beautiful landscape, beautiful weather, beautiful seas, beautiful women who are quite willing, and a great place to get some R&R. And, I would say a lot of the young men on this voyage had signed on to it expressly for that purpose, to get to Tahiti and see if the stories are true. They get to Tahiti, and yes, the stories prove to be very much true. And they are, unbelievably well received, and they eat like kings, and the women are beautiful, and there's a lot of carrying on on the ship, on the shore, but in the jungles. And it's a wonderful experience for the young men. Now, but Captain Cook is there for a very different reason, and that is to deposit this young man, Mai, the Polynesian, in his home islands, and to find a home for him with all of his belongings that he's accumulated in England, all sorts of things, muskets and weapons, swords, a full suit of armor, all these gifts from King George. So that's why Captain Cook is there, is to find a home for Mai.
A detail about finding a home for Mai. Mai is not royalty. He is a commoner, and he was dishomed because of war between his island and another island. He has revenge in mind. Perhaps it's one of the reasons he learned to be such a good Englishman with a weapon. He wants to take weapons back into his island. Cook sees this. Cook understands. Again, this is Cook, the psychologist. He wants Mai to have some status, and he realizes Mai, in the presence of the king of King George Island, too, is nobody. So he proposes that Mai marry one of the king's daughters. What does Mai say?
Mai's not interested. He just says that she's not very good looking. I don't like her. No, thank you. He somehow, in so doing, irritates the king and basically negates this whole scheme that Captain Cook has come up with. Captain Cook understands that, Mai is in a really difficult position. He's kind of a nobody who has now accumulated a lot of riches, and he's got to find he's got to find a home where he's not going to be constantly, people aren't going to steal his wealth and his muskets and all of the things that he's accumulated. And it's like Captain Cook is brooding over a wayward son, trying to figure out how to make a good home for him and a good life for him. And he worries about him. So they go from island to island, looking for a perfect place for him, and eventually ensconce him in a place called Huahine, where he lives out the rest of his days.
Yes, Cook calls these the Society Islands because they're all packed together or because it was whimsical. Cook gets to name a lot of things, and sometimes he leaves the names off and they wind up with the name Cook. A detail about Tahiti here in the final minute before we turn to Cook's moods. Red feathers. Did you solve that, Hampton? Why red feathers were so fascinating to the Tahitians?
Yes, well,
We've got 30 seconds.
okay. Captain Cook had accumulated a bunch of red feathers from earlier in the voyage, a place called Tonga, and he found that they were worth their weight in gold. The people in Tahiti couldn't believe that that Cook had all these feathers, and it became a commodity. It became a currency. It was a royal color. It was a color of the gods. It was unbelievable. It changed the economy, really, of some of these islands that Cook visited.
We're going to the other islands of society because there's tragedy ahead, and it has a deal to do with Cook's temperament. Hampton Sides is the author. The Wide, Wide Sea is the book. Imperial Ambition, First Contact, The Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook. This is Imperial Ambition, the contest with Spain, with France, with other powers in Europe, claiming the vast Pacific and the search for the Northwest Passage that will give an enormous commercial advantage to the nation that finds it and uses it. Captain Cook's third voyage now has left Tahiti, well, part of Tahiti, the main island, the King George III Island, and they're stopping at a part of the Society Islands called Moorea. It is still 1777 and late 1777, October. And the crew, especially the officers, have observed that this isn't the James Cook of the first two voyages, 1768 to 71 and 71 to 75, 72, 75. Man has changed. He's older, he's impatient, he's imperial, and yet Hampton, James Cook at this point is keen on in retaining all the pieces of his ship, and the natives that he finds, the indigenous peoples, steal because their understanding of property is not anywhere close to what Europeans regard as property. Also, they're without iron. We've noticed that the Tahitians are fascinated with red feathers. Everybody else is fascinated with iron, and also anything they can find that moves, they can steal. And we're on Moorea. This is October of 1777. Cook is alarmed at a report that the Spanish have been here or might be coming back. And then a goat goes missing. What is the goat? What does it mean to Cook? We're looking at his personality now and how tired he was. What did he do about the goat?
So Captain Cook had a number of animals on board his ships, and he had these goats that goats had never been seen before by the people of the Tahitian Islands. And one of these goats, a nanny goat that was actually pregnant, goes missing. And we see this other side of Captain Cook. He flies into a rage. He can't believe, the insolence of these people. They've stolen this animal that had been intended for Mai. This was also a part of a larger scheme to have animals, English style farms all over the Society Islands. So the goat goes missing. Cook makes all sorts of threats, and then when the goat still does not appear, he goes on this scorched earth campaign, basically across the island, torching every hut, torching every canoe and breaking up all the canoes that he finds along the way, and says, I will keep doing this until the goat shows up. It's like my kingdom for a goat. And Cook's officers can't believe his anger. It seems like he's blown this thing way out of proportion. He's never visited this kind of retribution on islanders before. And it goes on for a good number of days until finally the goat shows up. I guess you could say Cook's scheme worked in the end. He terrified these people. But Cook's men are just saying, what is up? What is up with our captain? He's gone too far. He's going, it's almost like, uh, Colonel Kurtz in Heart of Darkness. It seems like we're seeing this whole other dark side of this great man.
You note in his diary or his logbook, he calls it troublesome, unfortunate, and regretted.
Yeah.
The full sentence. Are there other instances where he's self-aware of his own rage and he's embarrassed by it?
Yes, I mean, he writes quite well in that passage. As he's leaving Moorea, he's understanding, hey, I really went over the brink here. I went over the edge. This was, he knew that he'd gone too far, but he doesn't examine himself much further. Like, ask the question, why? Why did I do that? Why, and I think the other factor in all of this is Cook is thinking about Mai. He's thinking about Mai's property. And if people are going to just steal his stuff all the time, this whole experiment of bringing Mai to England and then bringing him back home with all these belongings, it's going to be a horrible failure. And they're just going to steal all his stuff. So I think he thought, I got to make an example now of this theft to protect Mai's future.
Mai's future is the next island stop. From Moorea, these are the Society Islands. We go to Wahine, I believe that can help me, Wahine Island.
Huahine is usually pronounced.
And this is where they're to leave Mai. Again, Mai has this idea of revenging his family's murder by warriors from Bora Bora. And that is not going to happen. He comes to terms with that. They build him a house. What is it that Cook wants for Mai? He's saying goodbye to him forever. You have a very careful scene where Mai throws his arms around Cook and weeps in his arms. Why? What was the attachment?
Yeah, sort of a father-son thing, sort of maybe older brother, younger brother kind of relationship. They were super close by this point. Mai was also fearful of what might happen to him. He knew that he wanted to fight and revenge his father's death by fighting the Bora Borans. He wondered and worried, I think, that he might not live very long. And he actually had a brief moment where he decided he wanted to go back to England. So it was a very bittersweet and sad farewell. Cook knew that he would never see Mai again. And I guess Mai realized he would never see Cook again. And all the men on the ship by this point had grown to love this Polynesian man. And so it was a very sad moment where the ships sail off for Alaska and leave Mai to his fate.
And what is Mai's fate, or what is supposed happened to him?
Well, he did get into a conflict with the Bora Borans, just as he had hoped. He had muskets. He had all kinds of ammunition. He had all kinds of swords and knives. Metal. Here we go, metal. This is the thing that the Tahitians and all the Society Islanders would crave so much, was anything with iron. And Mai had it, and apparently, at least in one battle, he was victorious, but ultimately did not succeed in defeating the Bora Borans and in ejecting them from his ancestral lands. And it's believed that he died of some sort of influenza brought by the Spanish in a subsequent voyage, only 2, 3, 4 years after Cook left him. So things do not sadly, things do not go well for Mai once Cook leaves him.
And is the remains of his house still there? You've been there.
I went there. The house is not there anymore. This was a house that the British built for him, with a lock on it, so that he could protect all his various uh, trinkets and baubles and gifts that King George had given him. But no, it was destroyed apparently in a hurricane and long, long ago. There's now basically a Jehovah's Witness church there. But you can stand on the property and look out and see the view that he would have had and get a feel for what his last days must have been like.
We are bearing away for Alaska. However, there will be a surprise. Hampton Sides is the author. The Wide, Wide Sea is the book. Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook. Cook has a magic. He finds land that isn't there on the map. And sailing across the equator north, December of 77, they spot an island that we now know as Maui around Christmas time, I think. This is December 77 into 78. But the wind pushes them away from Maui, and they find an island that we call Kauaians. Kauai is part of the chain. It doesn't exist on his maps. What does he make of it, Hampton?
He can't believe it. He thinks it's a mistake at first. He wonders if it's an optical illusion or something. But as they get closer, they realize it's a major volcanic island, one of many in a chain. And he realizes immediately that this is a major find. This is not, some tiny little atoll somewhere uninhabited. There's a whole thriving civilization here. As the ships come closer, all these canoes are launched out to meet him and greet him. This is a true first contact experience for both sides. And the Kauaians, the men and women of Kauai, don't know what to make of Cook's ships. There's all sorts of oral history passed down that they thought they were some kind of giant manta rays that had emerged from the sea, or that they were gods, or that they were from outer space. All kinds of weird ideas. And then as they got closer, they saw these sailors smoking. They'd never seen smoking before, so they called them the volcano people, because there's smoke constantly coming out of their mouths, and they're reaching into pockets. They had never seen pockets, and they say, look at these people. They reach into their bodies and pull out treasure. All kinds of unusual first contact observations. It was like a party from outer space had just arrived, and it's working in both directions. Both sides are so curious about the other. And Cook immediately realizes, because he can kind of speak with them, he knows a little bit of Pidgin Polynesian by this point. He realizes these are Polynesian people. These are essentially the same culture as all those other people that he'd been hanging out with all those years. We're talking about the Tongans and the Tahitians and the Maori. And he's starting to realize, holy moly, these people these are expert voyagers. They have traveled the entire Pacific and populated the entire Pacific. They must be incredible long distance wayfarers. And he begins to puzzle over this question of the Polynesian diaspora, and realizing the extent of that achievement.
The Kauai is the end of the chain. Actually, there are a couple more islands after that. But what is striking about Cook's mood change, again, there is thievery, this time of iron, and sometimes they can steal the nails from the ship. They swim underneath. They swim like fish, the Kauaians. But again, he's not responding well to the environment. He does no other exploring. Did that strike you? Does that strike, for the last 200 years of biographers, have that struck people as strange that he didn't investigate the other islands?
Yes, I think people are saying, well, yes, Captain Cook was in a hurry to get to Alaska. He had a timeline in mind. He knew that he could only get to Alaska and do his work there during the summer. So yes, he was in a hurry. But at the same time, He could have gone eastward and southward and threaded through these incredible islands. And people have said, the old Captain Cook, the more curious captain of voyages 1 and 2, would have done that. At least get them on the map, chart them a bit, see what's there. But he didn't. He very quickly left Kauai and said, big discovery here, but I can't investigate it. I got to get to Alaska. And so he moves very quickly on back into the Pacific.
Clark did meet with a chieftain, Kanioneo.
Mhm.
Did Clark want to explore? Charles Clark, the commander of the second ship Discovery.
Yeah. He had a brief meeting with a high-ranking chief on Kauai, and it was a strange meeting, but it was a peaceful meeting. And that was really the only encounter like that that happened. Clark was having to sort of serve as the diplomat because Cook's ship had been swept westward in a storm. But anyway, the two ships regroup very quickly and get on their way across the Pacific towards North America.
One more detail before we head north.
Yeah.
Cook discovered that the Kauaians were extremely sophisticated builders and farmers, with fields laid out, with their foodstuffs assured. In other words, this is sophisticated civilization. Did he express that in his logs? Very different from what he met, say, in the Palawa or the Maoris.
Yeah, he did. This is another thing about Cook. I mean, he comes ashore and investigates. A lot of these explorers or captains just wanted to exploit resources and get the heck out of there. He wanted to observe. And so he came ashore pretty much by himself, unarmed, surrounded by thousands and thousands of Kauaian people. And they go up into the hills. They see the aqueducts and the plantations, breadfruit farms. He starts to realize that this is unbelievable earthworks that had taken probably centuries to build with these huge lava rocks. And he jots all this stuff down in his journal and gives us our very first written description of Hawaiian's civilization. And it's actually quite profound.
There's also speculation that one of Cortez's ships might have been here beforehand. Did they find evidence of it? Or is that just because the ship never came back, they guess?
The only evidence that they found was it was obvious that they had seen metal in limited quantities, probably from driftwood from some shipwreck that washed up on shore that had some nails in it or whatever. The Kauaians knew about metal, but they, and also the Spanish had been going back and forth across the Pacific for centuries in this thing called the Manila Galleon trade. And so it just would seem highly unlikely that they didn't at least spot the Hawaiian Islands at some point. But apparently they never came ashore. They never claimed it. They never investigated. And if they did come ashore, they hid all that information in their archives.
The book is The Wide, Wide Sea, Hampton Sides, reminding everybody this is imperial contest going on in the 18th century. Cook works for an empire. Imperial ambition, first contact, and the fateful final voyage. It's time to go north. New Albion, named by Francis Drake. Hampton, where is New Albion, and what did Drake mean by naming it that, what you'd have to say, mocking term?
Mm-hmm. Well, Sir Francis Drake had been on that side of the planet centuries before Cook, and had climbed his way up the west coast of California, what we now call California, and had named it New Albion because that was a quaint Latin term, a Roman term for England. So he was basically calling it New England to thumb his nose at the Spanish, who claimed all of the Pacific and certainly claimed the California coast. So Cook was returning, the first Englishman to really return to this place that Drake had been to all those years prior. and to start his, search for the Northwest Passage. His job is to start mapping the northwest coast of North America from about Oregon, what we call Oregon today, all the way up, and to try to duck into every inlet, every river, every harbor, every indentation, in the hopes that one of those is going to lead all the way across Alaska or Canada to the Atlantic Ocean. It's an insane thing when you think about the scope of his search, because we're talking about thousands of miles of coastline that he's charting, and he gives us really the first glimpse of what that coastline looks like. Washington State, Vancouver Island, southern Alaska, working his way all the way up to, the main part of Alaska, and then up through the Bering Sea and the Bering Strait and up and over Alaska even. It's unbelievable, the ambition and the scope of this search that he's prosecuting. And he gives us our first glimpse of what it all really looks like.
Detail. Benjamin Franklin has told the Americans, if you come across Cook, do not harm him.
Right.
Do not interrupt. The Spanish have a different message for their ship captains. What do the Spanish say, Hampton?
The Spanish are supposed to intercept him wherever they find him, and arrest him and haul him down to Mexico City and put him in a dungeon. The Spanish are very jealous guardians of the Pacific Ocean, and they think it's all theirs. And they're not actively at war with the English, but they effectively are. They have been for centuries, of course, fighting this sort of colonial and imperial contest. Whereas the Americans, Benjamin Franklin issues this thing that says to all the captains in the American fleets, even though we're at war with England, the revolution is going on at this point. Do not harm him. Do not arrest him. He's on a scientific mission. He's doing work for humanity. Let him go in peace. So it's interesting that Benjamin Franklin viewed Cook in such friendly terms.
These are extremely dangerous waters, given that you can't see where you are. There's fog perpetually, and when it's not fogging, it's raining or it's snowing. Calling it foul weather is an understatement. The ships are beaten up badly on the coast, and so they pull into what is called Nootka Bay, which sounds like paradise.
Mm-hmm.
These are the people called the Mawakat.
Mm-hmm. The Mawachat.
And Mawachat, and they treat Cook very well, and Cook's people treat them well.
Yes, there's another very good kind of first contact experience that happens there at Nootka Sound, with the Mawachat. They trade, they get along quite well. There's no violence. Cook stays about a month there. He's got to do a lot of repairs to his ship. I mean, you have to understand these ships are just, forests of lumber, all those clattering spars and sprits and booms and masts have to be repaired constantly. So they pull into Vancouver Island, and have nothing but really great timber to work with. And they rebuild the ships over a whole month. And while they're at it, they have these first encounters with the native peoples of Vancouver Island. It's quite an experience. And I went there doing the research for the book and stayed a number of days and went kayaking there and met some of the descendants of those the Moachat. And it's something that's still talked about a good bit in the oral history of the First Nations there.
Up the coast of Alaska, we're looking for the Northwest Passage, which would be seawater leading inland to connect to Greenland. And Cook has knowledge of Greenland, the Inuit,
Mm-hmm.
and he's looking for common cultural behavior. However, he also comes across large bodies of water. He can't tell whether they're going to lead or not. He's a very thorough man. He doesn't leave anything. He reminds me of writers I've known, such as myself. Even though you finish the sentence, you go back and back and back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's something particular about Cook that even though he knows he's on a false lead, this isn't going to work out.
Yeah.
He
It's
sends Gordon Bly out to investigate two rivers that leave where he is because he wants to make sure in his report back to the Admiralty that he didn't miss the Northwest Passage.
Yeah, he's very thorough, and that kind of meticulousness, I think, is the kind of personality you have to be a map maker, which is really what his true love was. His true genius, his true expertise was making maps, and particularly mapping coastlines, which you have to do. It's a very perilous thing to do. You have to get close to shore, but you don't want to run up against the rocks. And sometimes he's trying to map in such foggy conditions that he only knows land is there because he can hear the walrus barking and braying on the rocks. And that's some pretty dangerous charting to have to do. Everyone knows who's sailed in Alaska knows how treacherous those waters are, and visibility is often nil in that fog. But somehow we get from this expedition our first true map of Alaska. It's got some gaps and some imperfections, but it's pretty much Alaska as we know it today. Amazing that he was able to accomplish that.
Through the Aleutian Island chain, through in Bristol Bay, to Norton Sound, all the way up, weaving in and out, looking for the Northwest Passage. And now we get to the dramatic moment because he reaches the Bering Sea, finding their way blindly, really, because the Russian maps were either fantastic or deliberately deceptive. And he believes they found the opening, which we know is the separation between Alaska and Siberia. However, there a few days on, there's a brightness in the sky. What is that, Hampton?
This is something that Cook recognizes immediately from the time he had spent north of Newfoundland. It's called the ice blink, and it is a phenomenon where sunlight bounces off of the ice pack and sort of illuminates the underside of the clouds above. And he knew that what this meant was there's ice ahead. They're finally going to encounter ice, and that perhaps all those scientists who said, "Oh, seawater does not and cannot freeze," well, they're all wrong. And he does, sure enough, the next day encounter this impenetrable, implacable wall of very thick ice. And he realizes almost immediately, this dog ain't gonna hunt. This is not gonna work. We're not gonna find the Northwest Passage. Certainly not here. And in fact, not only that, but we got to get the heck out of here because his ships were almost immediately going to be encircled by the ice and trapped in the ice. And he has to make a very quick exit to save his life. And if that had happened, if they'd been trapped in the ice, I don't think we would have heard from either of the two ships again.
The choice now, do you winter in Kamchatka with the Russians, or do you think of your people and head for Tahiti or Hawaii?
Yeah.
Choice.
Right.
When we come back, Cook makes a decision. The book is Hampton Sides, The Wide, Wide Sea, Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook. There's no Northwest Passage to find. It's winter. Cook makes a decision not to winter with the Russians in Kamchatka, but to head to not even Tahiti. Let's go back to Hawaii. So they head south, and in January of 79, I think I have my dates correct. It might be January 79. They come through to the Hawaiian Islands. First, they're around Maui, and then they're around Big Island. But he doesn't land. What's his thinking, Hampton?
Well, he's come to Hawaii to warm up, to spend the winter, to replenish his ships, and to let his men thaw out a little bit, right? But he also, at this point, doesn't want too much contact with the native people. He knows that many of his men have venereal disease. He does not want his men, fornicating with the local women on the beach. He writes about this extensively in his journal. Like these are innocent people. They do not have this disease. We do not want to inflict it on them. So his idea is to circumnavigate the Big Island and trade via canoes with the local people who would come out in their canoes, and they would trade things, but control the bartering to a certain extent, and also make sure that his men weren't coming ashore. But slowly but surely, they go all the way around the island. Meanwhile, Cook is charting the Big Island. He understands this is a major, major find, and that the Admiralty back in England is going to want to know all about it. So, but he's like doing this weird dance where he's just offshore, flirting with the island, but not actually letting his men set foot on it. Until finally, after a number of storms and problems with the ship, they finally have to, he realizes they do have to anchor somewhere. And they find this harbor called Kealakukia Bay on the Kona coast, the west coast of Hawaii. And they come ashore at this unbelievably serendipitous time, which is the height of a festival called the Makihiki, which honors the god Lono, the god of fertility. And as they come ashore, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of canoes in the harbor, and they're all in rapturous, revelry. They're having this great festival, and they seem to think that Captain Cook is the god Lono returning, just as the prophecies had said that he would return in this fashion, in this direction, a clockwise circumnavigation of the island, that he would come in these two big ships, and that he would come during the festival. So weird timing. Anthropologists have studied and argued about this forever. Like, did they really think he was the god Lono or some kind of manifestation of the god? But he comes ashore, they call him Lono, they bring him to the temple dedicated to Lono, and he is the central figure in this elaborate ritual. It's very strange. He seems to be a god. And the thing is, though, he does very little, if anything, to disabuse the Hawaiians of this notion. Like, he goes along with it. He seems to say, well, they think I'm a god. Well, good. They'll give us more food and timber and water. And, so he goes along with this pageantry for a number of weeks.
And then January 26th, after all of this, now his log stops earlier in January, but on January 26th, they're ready to leave, and they have a sense that they've overstayed their welcome. So
Yes.
they set sail, but a mast cracks before they can leave the islands, and they turn back and land a second time in February. What do I have the date?
Yeah.
Early February 1779. And this time they're not welcomed. Why not?
Well, at this point, he's sort of like a god out of season. The Makahiki is now over. Lono is supposed to go away. It's a new season. It's a season of war. And furthermore, if they ever thought he was a god, they certainly understood he wasn't one now. His ship broke. What kind of god lets his canoe mast snap like that? They had overstayed their welcome. They, had sort of eaten the Hawaiians out of house and home, eaten all their pork and eaten all their fish. And, at this point, the Hawaiians have a very different attitude about Cook and his men. They are not welcome. And things start, again, this whole thing of theft starts happening again, but at a much higher level. They steal various tools, a sextant, all kinds of instruments from the observatory go missing, and Cook goes into one of his rages again, the rage that we had seen on some of the other islands, and he completely loses it, and his good judgment that he had exercised in so many other places seems to have left him, particularly when they steal a small, like a rowboat. One of the boats that the ships needed was taken in the night, and he marches ashore in a rage to try to kidnap the king of Hawaii for ransom. so that, bring them to the ships and hold them for ransom until that stolen boat would be returned. But this leads to this escalating series of kind of misunderstandings and miscues, and it very quickly becomes a melee on the beach, on the lava flats there at Kealakekua Bay that ends in Cook's very graphic and very violent death.
Yes, the death of Captain Cook became a central moment for the Enlightenment. I ran across wallpaper that the French had showing the death of Captain Cook. Everybody knew about it.
Yeah.
Your presentation is extremely dramatic and detailed, and you're with Cook as he doesn't run, he doesn't flee, he doesn't swim. The boats are offshore, and there might be some overhead water between him and the boats. The boats don't come in, the pinnaces with his Marines. The Marines open fire. However, when we come to Cook, he doesn't run. He doesn't flee. He stands there staring at hundreds of warriors. And when they throw rocks at him, he shields the back of his head as he's walking away. What is your sense of what he was trying to convey at that moment, Hampton?
Well, I think, he believed by this point that he understood Polynesian culture and Polynesian behavior and had observed so many different islands. And I think, he perhaps had a overzealous confidence in his own understanding. I mean, there were several moments there where he could have gotten away. If he had run and jumped in the water, you said he didn't swim. Well, he couldn't. That's unbelievable to me. Most officers in the English in the Navy did not know how to swim. They weren't required to learn how to swim. So if he had just jumped in the water, he would have been saved, but he couldn't. So I guess in a sense he was trapped there. But he also, he's the captain. He's got to project authority and he's got to project not just, the face of the voyage, but in a sense, the face of England, the face of the entire country. And I think that leads to his death very quickly because these are very fierce warriors and they want him out of there.
You've been to the spot of his death. There's a monument there. What does it look like? We have about a minute.
Yeah, it's an obelisk, a very large obelisk that was erected by the British on a piece of land that was deeded to England. It's actually a little swatch of land owned by England. And it's dedicated to, it just mentions that he died there and that he had discovered this place. Of course, the Polynesians discovered it, not the English, but it's a very controversial place now. People go down there to either commune with his spirit or vilify his spirit. People, a lot of the native Hawaiians, of course, hate him, and they have vandalized that obelisk and spray painted it and splashed things on it and have tried to pull it down because they view him as a symbol of colonialism, and they wish he had never come. So it's a very, you can feel the energy and the sort of the juju emanating from this nerve center, this unbelievable place.
The Wide, Wide Sea. Hampton Sides is the author. Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Final Voyage of Captain James Cook. I'm John Batchelor.